Hi, thanks for joining us for the AWS Summit Online. My name is Mark Schwartz. I'm an enterprise strategist with AWS, which means that I'm part of a small team of former CIOs and CTOs and other senior IT leaders who work with our customers at the senior executive level, generally in large enterprises, trying to help them overcome the real challenges of digital transformation. Things like cultural change, organizational structures, people skills, financing models, governance models, and things like that. Before I joined AWS, I was the CIO at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security. But through my career, I've done some work in the commercial sector as well as the public sector for nonprofits and for-profits, both small organizations, large organizations. I've seen things from a number of different angles, and that brings me to the first point that I want to make here, which is that change is hard. Change is hard both for public sector organizations and commercial organizations. When I was in the government, we tended to assume that change was hard because we were in the government, that all these things that seemed like obstacles, procurement and hiring practices and oversight and all of that, these things that were getting in our way, we thought to ourselves, well, the government is just really bad at IT or at digital transformation. But what I found is that isn't the case at all. I meet with about 100 commercial enterprises each year with senior executives, and I find that they're just as challenged in many cases. I won't name their names, but these are brand names that you're probably familiar with in all sorts of different industries. And I think what I've learned is that large enterprises, whether they're in the commercial sector or the public sector, face a common set of challenges, and it's very different from brand new startups. Brand new startups don't have any legacy to worry about. They don't have to change anything. They're just inventing themselves for the first time. But a large enterprise has a legacy. They have a way of doing things. They've been successful in the past. And so they've created a culture and a set of processes oriented towards doing those things that have made them successful. And that's great. That's what has made them successful. Of course, if they want to change now and they want to become digital or do something very different from what they've done before, well, they're going to have to unlearn some of the ways of doing things that they've gotten used to. They're going to have to reorganize, rethink, change their mental models, and unstick themselves from the legacy that they've developed. So let me give you a little bit of background on USCIS before I dive into the transformation we made there. So the first thing to know is that USCIS processes about 7 or 8 million applications a year for different kinds of immigration benefits. Things like green cards and naturalization, renewals of green cards, altogether about 95 different things that you can apply for with USCIS. The process is very much a paper-based process. They used to tell us that if you stacked up all of the paper that we received each day, that stack would be 1.8 times the height of the Statue of Liberty. So that's a lot of paper. Our processing centers had their own zip codes. They received so much paper each day. On the IT side, we were governed, overseen by a set of practices called MD 102, Management Directive 102. That was the DHS oversight process. And it required 87 documents and 11 stage gate reviews for each program. Our IT release cycle was about 18 months long on the average. We had a couple of really large IT programs that were notoriously not doing too well. Our USCIS transformation program had spent about $1 billion and not actually accomplished anything of value to the agency. Our verification modernization program had spent about 4 years and had produced a lot of paper, a stack of binders about this thick, but no actual code or any results that were useful to people. By the time I left USCIS, we were releasing code about 3 times a day. We'd moved to the cloud. We now had a microservices architecture. We were using a DevOps process. We were practicing user-centric design. We changed our way of doing procurements and our way of managing quality and security. And we were starting to teach the rest of Homeland Security how they might do a similar change. So we had learned a lot over the time we did that, and we had changed our way of thinking pretty radically. So what I'd like to do in this session today is to tell you a little bit about how we did that, what we learned along the way, and I hope it will be useful to all of you. So the first thing that I want to talk about is let's just sort of agree on what we're trying to do. What is this digital transformation? What kind of change are we trying to pull off? So I'd like to suggest that really it's about a way of working where we do things quickly in small bites, and based on each small thing that we do, we learn and we become better at trying to accomplish the mission results, the reason why we're doing things in the first place. So you work small, you release something for people to use, you watch what happens, you change your plans, and you improve in order to have the most success, the most mission success. So, for example, with our USCIS transformation program, the old way of thinking about a program and overseeing it, success was measured by, did you stay on budget and stay on schedule and accomplish all of the things you had planned to do at the beginning, everything in the requirements document, let's say. So for our USCIS transformation program, this would have meant that we spent 5 years and automated all 95 or so of our different kinds of application forms. And that would have meant that we were successful. But to me, that leaves out something very important. Doesn't it matter whether when we automated those forms, it sped up the process or slowed it down, for example? We started with the intention that as we automated things, there would be new efficiencies and we would get faster and faster, or our adjudicators would be able to move faster, and we'd be able to deliver better service to the applicants. Well, just the fact that we had finished 95 forms in 5 years doesn't mean that we would have. The way we would do this in the digital world, and the way that we learned how to do it at USCIS, is to begin working, release something, and from having people use it, see whether it actually sped up the process, the application process. And from watching how it was used, learn something, adjust course, get better and better at speeding up the application process. And to do that for essentially each of the goals that we had. Now, it turns out that speed has a lot of other advantages in the digital world that I'll talk about in a few minutes. It can also help us increase the stability of our systems. It can reduce risk. It can lead to quality improvements in general. But to execute a big program, something like USCIS transformation, what we're trying to do is break it down into small pieces and learn as we go and adjust course to get the best results. So the first thing that we learned that I want to tell you about, this is going to sound a little bit strange, but the principle that we learned quickly is that change is not a prerequisite for change. And what I mean by that is when you're looking at making a major change, a digital transformation, let's say, a lot of people's first thought is, here are the reasons why we can't do that. We can't do it because our culture doesn't support it, and our employees don't have the right skills, and the procurement process doesn't support it. There are all these reasons why it would be difficult to make this change, and that's understandable. And so the next thought is, well, we can't do this transformation until we change the culture. Cultural change is something that we're going to need if we're going to adopt this new way of working. But there's a little problem there, because cultural change isn't really a prerequisite for the transformation. You can't first change the culture and then transform. Cultural change is actually an output or a result of the transformation. You change the culture by changing how you do things. And the culture, as people learn a new way of working and a new way of being successful, the culture changes around that. The same thing goes for employee skills. Well, of course, the employees don't have the right skills for the digital world. They have the right skills for what everybody was doing before. And that's a normal part of transformation. And what happens is that as you go through this process of changing the way you work, employees develop new skills. So it's easy to think of reasons why you can't take that first step in transformation. But the only way that you can actually change the culture is if you start transforming. The sooner you start, the better. And that's how you do a cultural change. So that was our first learning. And once you see that, a lot of these challenges start to sound like excuses for not transforming. But the truth is that you address these challenges as you go, and you don't have to have all the answers before you start. The second principle that I wanted to bring up is this. We often had the idea when we were embarking on this transformation that our standards had to be lower because we were in the government, and government has all of these extra challenges. We're not as good as the commercial sector, especially those unicorn companies that you hear about all the time. And because we had that feeling, we had this urge to set the bar low for ourselves. But the fact is that the government, the public sector, government agencies can do this digital transformation thing as well as commercial entities can. Also, we owe it to the public, to the people that we're serving. What we have to do is set the bar just as high as anyone else and bring everything that we've got to bear on succeeding. Really, a public sector organization has a mission, and its job is to fulfill that mission impeccably, as well as it possibly can, right? And in order to do that, you have to actually shoot for the highest standards throughout the transformation. So it's tempting to say, well, we have to work through contractors and the contractors aren't doing a great job. Well, if the contractors are not doing a great job, you got to fix it. That's what we found. We had to change the way we did our contracting. We had to change the way that we oversaw the contracts. We had to insist on high quality standards. We started out from the position that we were going to not just have equal quality and equal security posture to what we had before, but that we were actually going to raise the bar on these things. We were going to have the highest standards. We measured our results at all times against business objectives and made sure that we were achieving them. And I think that's the position you have to take as you start a transformation, is to set a high bar and then coordinate everybody to move towards it. The next important point that I'd like to make is that in order to transform, to become more digital, you have to accept that speed and agility actually matter. It's another government temptation, I think, to say, well, this is the government. We don't really need to move quickly here. That's not the way the government's set up. We were talking in the government for a long time about Agile and DevOps and what those words mean and how we were going to do them in a government way. It's this, Agile, blah, 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 DevOps, blah, blah, blah. Really, these are just words. We spent way too much time trying to pin down what we meant by those things. It's really a lot simpler than it seems at first. Agile, DevOps, all of these just mean go fast, stay nimble. That's really it. There's sometimes a little bit of ceremony around how you might want to do it. But the truth is that if you are moving fast, being lean, and if you're staying nimble, which means willing to change, then you're agile. And DevOps is a way of getting there. And the IT world has discovered in general that this way of working, this fast and nimble way of working, leads to the best business results and the best technical results. That it's the right way to execute projects effectively. It's a way that you can control for budget overruns and make sure they don't happen. And so speed and agility becomes important even if you are in an environment that's used to moving more slowly. And when I say speed and agility, I don't mean that you try to work faster. What I mean is that you work in small increments and you produce results after each increment, and you keep learning as you move forward based on those small increments. And you do so within the context of the business objective that you've set. So when I say you're agile and nimble and willing to change, I don't mean you change to a completely different thing that you're trying to do. You start from an objective, but then within executing that objective, you change as necessary. So as an example of why speed to market, let's say, can be really important in the government, I like to tell this story. You probably remember President Obama's DACA initiative, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Well, I learned about DACA one day when it was an evening, I was watching the news and the president came on and he announced that he was going to be doing this DACA thing and that it would be rolled out in 60 days. Now, this was a bit of a problem because we were the ones who were going to roll it out, and he hadn't asked us if it was possible to do it in 60 days. And what he didn't know is that our average release cycle time, as I said before, was about 18 months, and that in order to roll out DACA, we were going to have to change 20 different legacy systems. So the math doesn't work out very well, but of course we figured it out. We learned to be faster. And we had to learn quickly how to be quick. Next principle I'd like to introduce here is that IT people need to be professionals. That's what they are. They're professionals at what they do. As experts in IT, they're expected to bring their expertise to solving government problems, right? So, somebody who's going to be an IT professional needs to be keeping up with developments in technology, new ways of working, new technologies, machine learning now, IoT, whatever it is, in terms of processes, DevOps, and microservice architectures, whatever the state of the art is. So compare this to doctors, for example. Medicine is a profession as well. What would you think if your doctor still believed that the best way to cure a disease was by bleeding you with leeches? Well, that wouldn't be acceptable, right? You expect a doctor to be staying up on what current medical practice is. And I think it's reasonable to expect the same thing from technologists and IT leaders. And once again, there's no real distinction between the commercial sector and the public sector when it comes to technical practices. The fact that you can maybe do a better job with concurrency by using functional programming paradigms. That it doesn't matter, right? What sort of a company you are or an agency. So IT experts need to do what it takes to stay current. They need to read the literature, go to conferences, ask good questions of vendors. And notably, I think it's important to get outside of the Beltway if you're in the US federal government, at least. and to learn from other organizations that are not at all affiliated with the government. It's unusual, or it would be unusual, for the contractors that are doing work for the government to be the top experts in whatever the new topic is. And I'm not trying to say anything negative about the Beltway contractors. There's a good reason why they wouldn't be. And that is that the government contractors generally bring the skills that we've asked them to bring. So the things that they are really good at are the things that the government has always asked for in the past. And now, as we change things, it was hard to find those skills right away in the contractor community. Of course, the contractor community then built the skills once they saw that we were asking for those things. But so we did everything we could to make our people feel like they were professionals and that that's what was expected of them. We sent them to conferences. We brought in coaches to work with them. We paired them with people who were already very good at some of the new practices. We brought in speakers and set up meetings with companies that were already using some of these digital approaches. So it turns out that there are a set of common dysfunctions that come along with bureaucracy. When people are in a very rule-bound context, one thing that happens is what's called the displacement of goals. What happens is people start to focus on the rules instead of on the mission, the outcomes. And you've probably seen this if you're in the US federal government. You've probably seen people become very, very focused on the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Rule, and know a lot of the minutiae of it. I'm not saying that's bad. What I am saying is that they aren't the point, right? The rules themselves are not the important thing. What's important is accomplishing mission. And of course, you have to obey the rules or get them changed if possible. But the focus should be on how you can work within those rules to accomplish a mission or an objective within that mission. And it's very common in bureaucratic contexts to find that people aren't thinking that way, that they're very focused on the rules and exactly how they work. I talked before a little bit about aggressive goals. Let me tell you a really good way not to do cultural change. As you can tell, I've seen this before. Here's how not to do it. You tell everybody in the organization that you want to change the culture to be faster and more responsive. And then you spend a few years debating whether to move to the cloud or move to DevOps or whatever it is. The thing is that for leaders, in order to drive a cultural change, it's necessary to keep reinforcing the messages, to be clear on what the vision is, and then to constantly be reinforcing or doing the things that make it clear that those things are what you really want to see. And so if you say you want speed, but then you move slowly, that undermines your message, I found. So one way that we found to make sure the message was strong and resonated very strongly was to set extremely aggressive goals. For example, we set a goal that all production deployments had to be done during normal business working hours. That seemed a little bit crazy to people when we said that. Obviously, when you're going to deploy something to production, when you're going to make a change that affects users, you do it on the weekend, you do it late at night. Everybody comes to the office with pizza and Red Bull and whatever. And then when everybody else comes in on Monday, things are going wrong. A deployment is a big, difficult thing. But we said, no, we're actually going to just do deployments during normal hours. Now, what that did was it focused everybody, the technologists and management and everyone else, on how they could possibly meet this objective. They had to work backwards from it, really, and they had to say, All right, well, that means we have to be able to deploy new code without stopping the business. It had to be a zero downtime deployment. And it had to be automated, and we had to have a way to roll it back if anything went wrong. And we had to have a way to monitor what was going on so we would know right away if something did go wrong. Um, and we had to have automated tests that we could trust, because if we were going to do these deployments during normal hours and do them frequently, we wouldn't have time to have a bunch of people do manual testing. If you see where I'm going with this, it became a problem-solving challenge for everybody. They had to work backwards, figure out how to do all these things. And in the process of figuring it out, that's how the culture changes. They find ways to do it. They're excited about it. They're proud about it. They see a useful outcome emerging, and the culture changes naturally. Another thing that we learned is that it's important to engage everybody in this transformation because it's so hard. You need everybody's help. The government and the public sector have a big advantage here because people, employees in government agencies, are mission driven. They love what the agency does, and what makes them happy is doing a better job at accomplishing mission. So if you're making changes, if you're transforming in a way that's going to result in better mission accomplishment, everybody wants to be part of it, at least once they understand that it's going to help improve the mission. So one thing we did, to give you an example, our QA teams, we had a very experienced QA staff with very good at doing their job. And they really cared about the quality of our IT systems. And the way they implemented their role was that when a new IT system was ready to be rolled out to users, they tested it, or they checked the results from testing, and they tried to make sure that it wasn't going to be deployed if there were any problems. So they sent it back typically to the developers for changes and improvements. And they did this very conscientiously and in a very respect-worthy way. What we did was we asked them to think a little bit differently about what they were doing. We said, your job isn't really to come in at the end and say the system isn't, the quality's not good enough, right? Go back and rework it. Your job, we said, is to make sure that everything is produced at a high level of quality in the first place. So essentially, if you come in at the end and find quality problems, that means you didn't really do your job, right? Your job is to make sure the quality is always high, and it is from the beginning. And this is the important part, we asked them to figure out how to do it. We asked them to use their creativity and innovation to figure out a way that they could accomplish this goal of making sure everything was produced at high quality. And they did. They came back with a bunch of great ideas. Things like, well, they would examine the automated tests that the developers were using to make sure they were good tests and they tested the right things. And they would participate in stand-ups and get involved early in the process. So they came up with a bunch of great ideas. A few months later, they came to me and they said, if we're in charge of quality, we should really be in charge of training the developers. And well, this was bizarre, right? I'd never heard of QA being in charge of training. But if you think about it, it's kind of brilliant because it really is a solution to the problem that I gave them. So we tried it, and it worked quite well. And finally, they wound up innovating a new technique. They called it faint signals that let them examine the development process as it was going on to try to predict where quality problems were likely to occur and to intervene early. So I was so impressed by what they did. And I couldn't have thought of those things myself. So what worked really well for us was this idea of empowering people or engaging people in solving the tough problems so that everybody's brains were on it. This turned out to be kind of fun because anytime somebody told us we couldn't do something that we were trying to do, we would just turn the question around and say, okay, I get that. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. How do you suggest we do it? And that led to great conversations, for example, with procurement people. Whatever, our first idea was about what we wanted to do, they said, well, that doesn't work under the FAR. But then when we challenged them to figure out the right way to do it, they often came up with these great solutions that were consistent with the rules. Same thing worked in legal oversight, all the various parts of the organization that can stop something, stop a transformation as you're trying to pull it off. So the last strategy that I want to mention that we learned is a very powerful way to kind of seal in this cultural transformation is to let people be proud of what they were accomplishing. So our employees, as they started to adopt these DevOps ways of working, these new ways of doing security, all of those things, they went out and they started to speak at conferences, and they had meetings with people from other agencies who were maybe trying to do the same thing but hadn't figured it out yet. And our team went out and felt really good about what they were doing. And even more, when they talked to other organizations that hadn't learned these tricks yet, they became even more aware of how well it was working for us, why the way we were doing things was a better way to do things. So they were justifiably proud of what they'd accomplished. And it felt very good for all of us that they were out and teaching other people. So unfortunately, this is a short session, and there's a lot more to tell you, really. So one thing you might want to take a look at, my new book is going to be published in October, and it actually tells a lot of the stories from our digital transformation at USCIS and some of the things that we learned. It's called The Delicate Art of Bureaucracy, Digital Transformation with the Monkey, the Razor, and the Sumo Wrestler. So you might want to pick it up and give it a read and let me know what you think about it. Our enterprise strategy team has a number of other books that leaders and organizations have found useful. So these are some of the titles, and you might find that they're useful for you. So in summary, what I really want to say is that you can succeed. You can succeed no matter what obstacles you're facing. Really, it's about approaching the transformation with integrity, with confidence that what you're doing is the right thing, and a knowledge that you're doing it because it's in the organization's best interests. It's going to support mission accomplishment the best possible way. And that you can't actually succeed in a transformation unless you start transforming. Tomorrow, do it. At least that's what we found. It's just move forward, deal with the obstacles when they occur, learn as you go, which we did a lot of. And so I hope that you'll take this to heart and learn some lessons, and maybe come back next year and you deliver the presentation so that I can learn something from you. So thank you. Thank you very much for listening and for joining us. And please don't forget to complete the session evaluation. Thanks.